Hello and welcome to Make It Conscious. This is Max and welcome to a new series. Today is the beginning of a new series of videos all about work and livelihood. It's called The Future of Work. And if you've enjoyed the Mapping the Shadow series, we talked a bit about it there in some of the later episodes. So you guys seem to like that, and I thought for many reasons, why not do a whole series devoted to that broad topic? If you're familiar with my 7 Habits model, this is all going to pertain to habit 4, which is all about really how to approach the need for a livelihood, right? This is very much part of any self-knowledge journey, which is what we're all on. We're going to be looking at why that is. We're going to be looking at some quotes. Some you would have heard before, some you almost certainly won't have done. And understanding the role that work and livelihood has to play in your own personal journey. And I think it's a very salient topic of the day for many reasons. One of which is that work and spirituality, let's say, or the pursuit of self-knowledge, they tend to have a bit of a difficult relationship, right? So there's many folks out there who will overtly talk about the connection between the two. There's also many folks who will say or imply that they're pretty much nothing to do with each other, or even that the pursuit of, say, money is actually an evil thing in itself. And then you might get those somewhere in the middle who say, well, no, pursuing money is fine. You can do that as long as you do this other stuff over here. And then at the same time, you got the folks who, are all into manifestation, the law of attraction, this kind of thing, who might have you believe that spirituality is entirely about what you create and do in the world. Well, that's one reason I want to give a perspective on all of that. And the second reason is that this particular topic seems to be becoming more and more important as part of this overall conversation. There's many events happening in the world. There's many trends occurring in the world. Many people will look at this through a technological angle, of course, and seeing how that's evolving so rapidly. The sudden availability of AI back in 2022, at least to the public, and how that in the space of less than 3 short years has developed and evolved quite considerably and is already changing all of our lives. And if you're not considering that movement within your own profession and how it could either so-called threaten your profession or how you might actually use it as a way to be more human, then you're going to get a rude awakening, I think. But that's just one symptom. There's so many features we could talk about, so many trends we could talk about. But as those of you who know this channel, you'll know that I like to approach things from a psychological perspective. It's not the only way of approaching things, of course, but ultimately everything we experience is through our own minds, it's through our own psychology, and there's a lot of useful philosophy we can call on, I think, to try and understand what might be happening at a deeper level. So from the last series, if you saw that, Mapping the Shadow, that I call on idealist philosophy quite a lot, so the work of people like Hegel and Schelling. As a certified Jungian coach, I also find a lot of truth in what Carl Jung had to say, but I don't necessarily subscribe to him wholesale, and I think he would have probably cautioned against doing exactly that. He didn't claim to be a philosopher, although he was by another name, but he knew as well as anyone that what he was saying was merely a thesis to be used and carried forward. So I continue in that same vein, and the title of this first video of this series is called Work is a Spiritual Practice. Just immediately, I'm curious if this brings anything up for you. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And if you do agree, to what extent do you agree? In what way do you approach your own work as though it is a kind of spiritual practice? Or conversely, in what ways does your work call you to engage with a deeper aspect of yourself? I'm not going to discuss what I mean by spiritual here. I've talked about that in previous videos. Search what is spirituality if you would like a take on that. You may have noticed I don't actually even use the word spiritual that much. I mean, it's a perfectly valid word. I think it makes sense. We are talking about the movement of spirit ultimately, but 2 reasons don't use it. One is that it's not particularly self-explanatory if you're not familiar with certainly idealist philosophy. What does spiritual mean? It doesn't explain itself. And the other reason is that it has a lot of baggage, right? So if you search spiritual on Instagram, I haven't done this, but if you do, I imagine you'll see a lot of stuff that probably have very little to do with what I'm going to talk to you about today and in this series. Nonetheless, work is a spiritual practice. And what I really mean by that is that it's a key component of developing self-knowledge, right? Spirituality is, in a nutshell, the process of developing, or the interest in developing self-knowledge. Now, it's what we might define as the self and God and spirit beyond that. You don't even need to believe in any of that. You don't even need to regard yourself as spiritual, I would think, to get value from this episode. But for those of you that do, likewise, we can talk about definitions till the cows come home. None of that's the point. And as with all my videos here and all my content, the whole idea of it, or at least a key theme of it, is to give you something to work with. It's not to say, hey, here's the truth. Here's what I have figured out. It's the absolute truth and you should all believe me. It's nothing like that. Because as I said just a few episodes ago, everything contains truth and everything contains falsity. Use what I'm sharing here as, if anything, a kind of vehicle to figure out on your own. Right? Use this. Take responsibility for your mind. Figure out where you see truth in it, and where you don't see truth in it, discard it. None of these things I'm sharing are the point in themselves. They're just, well, they're sounds ultimately, right? They're words. But moreover, they are ideas that you can use to try and access something a little deeper here. And that's something that you can never capture in words. So, right, work is a spiritual practice. Where do you sit on that continuum? Do you think that work has nothing to do with spirituality? Or in your mind, is spirituality entirely about getting so-called results in the external world? So first of all, for those of you that are watching a video, I'm sharing a slide here of 4 tarot cards. So what's this got to do with anything? Well, just to set the scene here, I'm showing here the ace of every suit from the tarot. If you're familiar with the regular playing card deck, it's a similar sort of thing here. There's also 4 suits, which actually correspond to the 4 I'm showing here. So you've got the Ace of Wands, Cups, Swords, and Discs, aka Pentacles. These 4 represent what might be termed the 4 modalities of consciousness. So think about everything you ever experience can be chalked up to one of 4 things. It might be an aspect of your will. Sometimes it's also interchanged with like intuition. So, but we don't need to go there now, but the will, and this is represented by wands. Secondly, feeling or emotion. Sometimes intuition takes up a part of that as well, but to all intents, you've got volition and feeling. And then thirdly, you've got intellect. So thoughts being a huge part of that, the ability to splice and cut up ideas and get really precise and make decisions based on what's logical. And then lastly, you have sensation. And that, of course, is also associated with physical, material, and worldly life. So everything you ever experience or think about can be related to in terms of these 4, whether it's a combination of 2 or more, or whether it's falling under one of these categories. And so the point here is that self-knowledge involves engagement and a relationship with all 4 of these suits. That's really what the tarot is about. Every card in the tarot also relates to these in some way. And so this one in the bottom right here is discs. This represents sensation. This represents the material world. And of course, it should be no surprise to you that if you've seen any of my other videos, that freedom is the core theme to all of them. Self-knowledge is about gaining freedom. And where you don't have freedom, there's something you lack around your self-knowledge there. So the same applies to the world of materiality and finance. Now, there's a difference between, say, the kind of like financial freedom or abundance that a lot of unscrupulous internet marketers will try and sell you, right? There's no such thing as freedom without limitation. Now, someone I don't quote very often is Warren Buffett, but bear with me here, because if you look at Warren Buffett, who is a legendary investor, right? He's one of the richest, wealthiest people on the planet. He, I think, was the wealthiest person on the planet, at least for a time. Now, I'm not saying anything about his ethical integrity, but just in one particular dimension, what's interesting about him to a lot of people, even other quite wealthy people, is that he doesn't flaunt his wealth, and he lives much like a middle-class guy to a lot of folks. Like, he drives around in a modest car. He lives in a, a decent house, but it's not like super flashy mansion or anything. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that he knows how to turn $1 into probably $10 in a pretty short space of time. So it's like, well, every dollar he saves, he makes good with. He's allocating resources effectively. But also because he recognizes that freedom in the material realm, he might not think about it this way, but freedom in a material sense is achieved within limitation, right? If I was to just go around buying like top luxury brand, like if everything I bought had to be like the most top luxury brand there is, that's not freedom. That's actually another form of slavery. So freedom, true freedom, is it's the result of a dialectic. It's the synthesis between what you feel as freedom, your free will, and limitation, and being as close to your implicit nature as possible through that process. So we're all born with limitation. We set limitation for our own actions, right? We set consequences. And it's about reconciling with those. So, for example, if you spend your money frivolously, like a lot of people who encounter wealth very suddenly, they tend to do, right? Whether it's famous sports people who suddenly make a lot of money, or there's countless stories of lottery winners, right, who won tens of millions, but didn't have the mindset to actually warrant that. And so wherever they went, they found themselves pretty much back where they started, which was penniless, because they didn't have the actual inner integrity to hang on to it, to use it well. So it didn't make them more free. It just made them just as enslaved as they were before, but with a higher degree of magnitude, let's say. So they blew out, they spent all their money just as frivolously as they ever did before. So clearly, increasing the number of digits in your bank account isn't in itself going to improve your level of freedom. It's certainly a factor. And if you honor and respect freedom and you know yourself well and you understand freedom and limitation within the material world, then you can use finance very well. So the key point of this slide is really just to say, don't overlook this realm as a key component of your freedom, right? We're all talking about free will and intuition, the role that intuition plays in developing self-knowledge, right? Performing active imagination, listening to your conscience, all of this. Feeling, huge one. Engaging with your own feelings, being willing to do that, being willing to have empathy, to feel what you feel as well as what other people feel. And of course, it wouldn't be self-knowledge without the intellect. Philosophy is the love of truth. We have to be able to be discerning, we have to be able to apply critical thinking, and thinking also often gets a bad rap. And the last series, Mapping the Shadow, I touched on all of these areas, but certainly it was probably quite thinking heavy and getting very granular and precise. Well, we have a fourth dimension here, which is the sensory and the world of finance, the mundane world of commerce, of livelihood, of contribution. And master-slave dynamics, you can bet your bottom dollar, they play out in this sector just like any other. They play out in all four of these worlds. And the material world is no exception. In fact, it's a pretty good proxy for understanding the extent of it in other areas as well, because you actually see, you can measure even all kinds of things. We're going to be getting onto that. Like, how do you actually measure progress, for example? Can you measure progress? But you can actually certainly have some physical, tangible idea of the role of power dynamics, the role of deception, the role of freedom in the world. And to set the scene here, I'm going to read a poem by Khalil Gibran. And this is capturing in a few sentences better than I ever could exactly what I'm trying to get at here in the attitude to work that's needed. So it goes like this. You work that you may keep pace with the earth and the soul of the earth. For to be idle is to become a stranger unto the seasons, and to step out of life's procession that marches in majesty and proud submission towards the infinite. When you work, you are a flute, through whose heart the whispering of the hours turns to music. Which of you would be a reed, dumb in silence, when all else sings together in unison? Always you have been told that work is a curse, and labour a misfortune. But I say to you that when you work, you fulfil a part of earth's furthest dream, assigned to you when that dream was born. And in keeping yourself with labour, you are in truth loving life. And to love life who labor is to be intimate with life's inmost secrets. Work is love made visible. Well, there's nothing I can add to that other than to say it captures exactly what I am trying to get at in this program. And the message that work is not something you need to resent. In fact, maybe even the word work itself is a bit misleading, because work sounds like something negative. Of course, we've all got to put energy into our lives. It would be self-contradictory not to, because due to the fact that we are all partial, we have a physical existence, right? And we exist in a kind of separation from the world. And yet we must all take from the world. We must all eat. We must all sleep somewhere. There's a physical limitation that has been set up. And so we must also contribute to that, back to it. We must keep the machine going in order to live at all, in order to have any existence. And that's all necessary for self-knowledge to occur. And so your relationship to that fact, that unavoidable fact that you are going to have to put energy in life, you are going to have to contribute something, you're going to have to do some work. And there's many, many different views on this. I wouldn't go so far as to say that any work is better than no work. The communists certainly here mostly thought that. But, there's some truth in that, a degree of truth, because to just do nothing, it's no wonder that feels terrible, because it's a split that runs right down your psyche when that occurs, because you're basically saying, I want to take, but I don't want to give. And that quickly breaks down for all kinds of reasons. For one, who's going to recognize you, right, if you're not contributing? So, right, that said though, you'd all be familiar with the famous section from Genesis 3:19, where God says to Adam, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. So this is Adam's punishment for eating the fruits from the tree of knowledge. So there's many ways of interpreting this, and I suppose a psychological or Jungian way of interpreting it might be that this is man becoming partial. And again, this in itself is not inherently bad thing, and it certainly sounds like that if you read Genesis. God clearly has this very punishing tone. But actually, in other sources, you'll understand that it was also kind of God's intention that man would develop knowledge of good and evil. And that's actually necessary in order for the split to occur, in order for man to develop separately and to gain self-knowledge. And so the idealist might have seen this as, for spirit to become aware of itself, it has to split off, to become partial. And hence is the beginning of all sin, because to sin means to miss the mark. And to miss the mark, I think of as simply meaning misaligned. We talked at length in the previous series about morality and evil and self-contradiction. The simple fact that we all have different values, sure. And at one point we might think, our values are just better than everyone else's. That's like a pretty natural thing to think early in life. You got that sort of master-slave dynamic phase, which Hegel understood was actually necessary. Problem is getting stuck there, right? But if you're not getting stuck there, then what you don't want to do is move to the other side, the other extreme, and think, well, every value is just the same. Because if I can't say that my values are better, for want of a better word, right, than anyone else's, then I might as well just do away with values completely. I might as well just say, well, everyone's equal, everyone's different, and leave it at that. But of course, one of the themes of the Bible is the truth of hierarchy. But what that means is that some values are less contradictory than others. I mean, the value that everyone's equal is blatantly contradictory. It falls down very quickly, but you wouldn't know it necessarily looking at much of the Western world. So there's no truth in either. Well, there's truth in either side, but neither is absolutely true in itself. There has to be some synthesis in the middle, and that's not something you can just simply capture, because the moment you try and put words to that, it's no longer a synthesis, it becomes partial again. This is a large part of what that last series is all about, mapping the shadow, and we're going to be looking a bit at the shadow map in this series as well. I'm going to be referring to that from time to time, but not now. So Not enough time for that now. So I'm going to move to a quote by Seth Godin, probably one of the greatest marketing thinkers there is, certainly one of the good guys. There aren't many of those in marketing, I dare say. So in his book, The Icarus Deception, he said that being an artist isn't a genetic disposition or a specific talent. It's an attitude we can all adopt. It's a hunger to seize new ground, make connections, and work without a map. If you do those things, you're an artist, right? Because there's the idea of artist, the stereotypical artist, and there's the truth of what it really means to make art, right? To take conception and turn it into perception, to bring something out of yourself into the world, to express yourself in the world, but to do so as a way to discover truth. Right? If you're just making inane, cheesy art, it's hard to say that you're really an artist. You might have the label of artist, but are you really producing art? Are you really doing the work of understanding yourself and communicating a message? Are you tapping into something in the unconscious that isn't easily seen? And are you communicating that in a way that's honest and skillful? So, a few things I want to say about what I believe then and what's really inspired this in terms of just thoughts I've been having recently. And with the influx of AI everywhere, this was always coming, right? Like, as long as I've been alive, it wasn't exactly a tall order to say that we're going to have something like this, artificial intelligence, in my lifetime as a millennial. It was all over sci-fi series from the 90s, right? The idea of talking to a machine, that's way older than me. It's probably way older than anyone else watching this video. And it's hardly prophecy to imagine how something like this might come about. Sure, the actual way, the technology, the way it actually works, I don't know. I know a bit about deep learning. I don't know how they pulled it off. I'm not much of a nuts and bolts kind of guy. But there's nothing surprising about this. There shouldn't be anything surprising about this. And there are precedents for this, for things like this, where new technology comes along and might appear to put people out of work, and or that would be the primary fear, and does put people out of work. But this also highlights an egregious misunderstanding about what work really is. And it comes back to this core theme. Work versus contribution. What is work, right? Is work something that someone else offers you? Because that doesn't really make sense, right? Like, is a job just something you find on an online message board or on LinkedIn? Are there a finite number of jobs in reality? There may be in terms of how many there are advertised online or wherever on any particular site. But is there a limit to what you are able to contribute? And if you're able to contribute something, whatever that is, if it's valuable in the eyes of someone else, is there any reason why you shouldn't be recompensed for that in any way? What I'm getting at here is that whatever the new technology is, yeah, of course, there's always going to be collateral damage. There's always going to be change that has to occur, but change is happening anyway, right? It's not the AI's fault that you have to experience some uncomfortable change, really, at its essence. Because as long as there's tension, as long as there's self-contradiction, that's going to show up one way or another. The new technology, whatever it is, the policy that comes in, is really just highlighting something that's already there in principle. Now, I understand there's complexity on a temporal and practical level, and there's also a place for pragmatism and fairness and compassion. Of course there is. I mean, you saw the slide about the tarot cards, and I hope you took that on board. I hope you don't judge everything about me by the words I'm saying right now. Although if you want to, feel free. The AI being non-human and being different from you can ultimately never replace you. It might replace what you're doing right now. But why do you want to stick with that no matter what? Okay, so I get there's another side to this as well. I'm simply just presenting a side that I think either isn't articulated often enough, or when it is, isn't approached from this psychological perspective or even a spiritual perspective. It's often approached from a historical perspective or an economics perspective, perfectly valid. You know, for example, the fact that the Industrial Revolution, as terrible as that was also brilliant, right? Like, think of all the good things that came from that. I mean, no one in their right mind now would endorse 10-year-old kids working 60-hour work weeks. for next to no, well, for any amount of pay, hopefully, let alone for like almost no pay. Okay? No one in their right mind is ever going to endorse that. That's the whole point, right? Is that whichever way you look at it, you can find aspects that appear completely untenable. Those of you who are familiar with my shadow map model will have some appreciation of this. Those of you who aren't, hopefully your intuitions on some level can resonate with what I'm saying. So that said, there's certain limitations in AI that mean they will never truly replace the work of a human. They might augment and they might do things that maybe a human might or shouldn't have ever really been doing, arguably. There's a degree of creativity that AI can achieve. And it draws up all kinds of questions about, what do we even mean by creativity? Because one kind of creativity is to machinate what already exists, present it in a different way, combine things, recapitulate it. That's something that AI is very, very good at. That's a form of creativity. But there's another kind of creativity which is contingent on an interface with the unconscious, bringing into existence something that doesn't exist yet in any actualized form, engaging with inner content, implicit content that only a human can do. I stand to be corrected here. There's competing philosophies as well about the nature of AI and consciousness and what this really means. The fact is, we're here, so we were created by something, prior conditions, and maybe ourselves on an essential level. And so personally, I'm very open to the idea that maybe AI could become conscious. I mean, it's kind of contradiction in terms, because if it was truly intelligent, it wouldn't be artificial. However, the way I lean at the moment is that I don't see any reason to think that is true. It can certainly appear that way. But then again, our appearance is that different from reality. If enough people project enough onto it, who knows what could happen, right? One thing's for sure, it won't ever be able to violate the natural order at any essential level. It will be subject to the same non-contradiction at essence. It will be part of the same dialectic. It won't be able to violate itself at a logical level, right? It will always have to check out in the end. There's probably enough said about that, other than I just think that in summary here, there's an opportunity here as well as an apparent threat. And the organization, so wherever you work, if you work for an organization, controversial opinion here, they can be places of purpose and self-discovery. There's nothing about groups of people coming together to achieve something or to share expertise towards a single aim. There's nothing about that that prevents it from being a genuine place of self-discovery. Now, I've worked for many organizations. I'll give a potted history in a future episode. But for now, generally the ones I knew, not all of them, but the ones I worked for, weren't really interested in my growth, not genuinely. And they may have been interested in improving my skills or improving the tools for me to do this thing that they wanted me to do. But that was short-sighted because they didn't believe, judging by their actions, that my own self-realization was a good thing for their organization. And I would have to disagree with that. I think that the only kind of organization worth working for going forward is one that actually honors that. And if it transpires that it's not a good fit, that the employee's development in a genuine direction, like towards true self-knowledge, is a threat to the organization, then is there any harm in that person moving on, saying, thank you very much, this was maybe the right thing at the right time, maybe not. But at this point in time, it's clear that we're not aligned, and I'm going to try and find something more aligned, whether that's with another organization or working on my own or starting a business. So as I say here, the authenticity and self-knowledge of its people is of a benefit to organizations, not a threat. And if, as an organization, the ethos is that that's actually a threat, sure, we're going to develop people in technical ways, practical ways, but only insofar as it helps them do what we have already predetermined to be the right thing, then there's going to be a mismatch there. Now, again, there's limitations to this because every organization by definition has certain shortfalls, has certain contradictions, right? Because firstly, the organization is defined by the fact that it pursues a certain goal or a certain stated end, whatever that might be. So already it's different from a human being, because a human being is at their best intending to understand themselves at the deepest possible level, and maybe to help other people do that as well, maybe to create something in the world that expresses themselves fully. Great. An organization is usually a little bit more fixed in that regard. That doesn't mean it can't morph, can't evolve, because the organization should exist symbiotically with the world around it and the people in it. So there's a bit of a difference there. And the second reason is simply just the fact that you have lots of people, right? So an individual is a unit, but the individual is also split. That's the whole premise of Jungian psychology, right? It's the whole premise of many kinds of idealism, is that we are split. And mysticism, right? That spirit is split. We are all like bits of spirit split off, doing our thing. And the individual is like that. And so, of course, the organization is exactly like that. With each individual, imagine each individual as an individual unit within the organization, each with their own needs, desires, views, preferences. And the idea is that it all comes out in the wash and the organization performs its role reasonably well. But this all sits within a wider context where society, culture is moving away from its obsession with measurement and the largely unfounded belief that you can just pursue metrics of growth ad infinitum and not have any problems. This is going to be one of the primary lessons of this century. We're going to be talking about that in future episodes. There's many reasons for that, there's many signs alluding to that, there's many problems that are reaching a crescendo right now associated with not understanding that. That's the whole point. That's one of the whole reasons the Western world is the way it is today. It's completely makes sense in context. So there's a few things I believe. There's a couple more here. So I also believe that the 21st century needs organizations and people to move beyond power dynamics into mutually honoring relationships. That is, honoring each other's freedom. Now, as an employee, you have a relationship with the organization. It has a relationship with you. You share that relationship, just like you would with another person. And like all relationships, there's no one-size-fits-all answer to nourishing that relationship and making it work. But there are some pretty core lessons that are generally a good idea. One of those is to take responsibility in that relationship. Another one is it's kind of the same thing, honor freedom, honor your own freedom, honor the other person's freedom, not heedlessness. We've discussed at length why heedlessness is not freedom. See the previous episodes on mapping the shadow, especially the final one about freedom. No, but honoring that person's need to be who they are at essence. That's one. And a second one, pretty key, is empathy, right? It's cultivating empathy. It's being willing to meet and be transformed by experience, by the relationship. Be willing to evolve in that relationship, not just digging your heels in and saying, well, this is what I want, and then getting upset when the other person is basically doing the same thing, just with a different flavor. But up until this point, this idea of the master-slave dynamic, this is an idea that Hegel coined, and it's key to his philosophy. I did an episode on that as well a few episodes ago. Check it out. It's called the modern master-slave dynamic. And my case there was really that it shows up in all kinds of ways. It's this idea that one person or one entity seeking recognition believes at some point that the best way to get that is to push other people down, and doesn't see the contradiction there. And so this is a self-contradiction that has to resolve eventually. And I'm under no illusion that master-slave dynamics at all will disappear, let alone quickly or this century, but they will change form. And I think realistically, they could diminish somewhat. If culture goes in a good direction, that's kind of the whole point of it, is that it begins to honor freedom more and more. It's not going to remove the need for every individual to go through that phase, but hopefully it's a phase that you get through at an early age and don't just, because of your trauma and your unwillingness to actually examine yourself, just hold on to for the rest of your life. And one way of achieving that is that, well, the understanding of it becomes more widespread. And so even when people are trying to drag you into a master-slave dynamic, you see it. And so you don't play your role in that, either as trying to become the master or being a willing slave. Both are equally sinful, right? It's Like trying to dominate others or sticking your hands up to being dominated doesn't help anyone, certainly doesn't help yourself. So what about this? Organizations that are willing to take the risk of losing control. So in a nutshell, that's where like quite a lot of good things come from, right? It's taking the risk of losing control. And the curious twist is that you actually gain a lot more freedom. If you're okay with being hungry from time to time, or you know that you can weather financially difficult periods, then suddenly you're actually a lot more free to make the right decision. And by that, I mean the decision that is aligned with you, who you are at your essence, but also a decision that is ethically sound in terms of not violating other people's freedom. So, lastly, I believe that this won't merely be a so-called competitive edge. As long as we're trying to think in terms of needing a competitive edge, well, that's not freedom, right? That's not selfhood. Because the only place you need to compete is in areas where you are not fully realized yourself. Same for organizations. Again, there's practical differences with organizations, of course. If different organizations are all selling different brands of biscuit, then clearly those brands of biscuit are going to compete. That's the nature of working in organizations, right? I think maybe at some point in the future, there'll be some alternative way of doing that. I'm not going to speculate around that now. It's not like these dynamics are just going to disappear, and neither is it saying that they're bad. We're going to be talking about that as well. We're going to be looking at the work of Adam Smith, for example, and the value he brought to the table. But in terms of human beings who actually need to be true to themselves, they won't want to work for an organization that doesn't honor their freedom. It just won't be tenable. And that captures a lot of why we're seeing so many problems in the working world right now, like quiet quitting, arguments around whether we should be doing homeworking or not. It all ties together. It's all a discussion around freedom, ultimately. Let's move on from that. So, last slide now from this episode. I'm going to leave you with this, just going to ask you a couple of questions. Because we've been talking about how work relates to self-knowledge and how work is a spiritual practice. And I've alluded to how not only can you know yourself through work, we're going to be talking about this more, but not only can you get to know yourself through your profession and your livelihood, but also how you can express yourself through your livelihood and contribute, right? We're going to be talking more about that, but for now, a couple of questions for you. Feel free to jot your answers down below. 1, what contribution are you making through your work currently? And 2, what do you gain from your work? And how does it improve you? So, obviously think beyond just a paycheck here. And I'll leave you with that. So for now, thank you again for your time and attention. Hope you found that useful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.